This is a reading from the poem of the man God, Volume 5, Episode 605, The Crucifixion. It was written on the 27th of March, 1945. It's a 23-page chapter, so I'll probably end up reading it in parts. 4 brawny men who look like Judeans, and Judeans more worthy of the cross than the condemned men, certainly of the same category as the scourgers, jump from a path onto the place of the execution. They are wearing short, sleeveless tunics, and in their hands they are holding nails, hammers, and ropes, which they show to the condemned men, scoffing at them. The crowd is excited with cruel frenzy. The centurion offers Jesus the amphora so that he may drink the anesthetic mixture of myrrhed wine, but Jesus refuses it. The 2 robbers instead drink a lot of it. Then the amphora, with a wide, flared mouth, is placed near a large stone, almost on the edge of the summit. The condemned men are ordered to undress. The 2 robbers do so without shame. On the contrary, they amuse themselves making obscene gestures towards the crowd, and in particular towards a group of priests who are all white in their linen garments, and who have gone back to the lower open space little by little, taking advantage of their caste to creep up there. The priests have been joined by 2 or 3 Pharisees and other overbearing personages whom hatred has made friends, and I see people I know, such as the Pharisees Johanan and Ishmael, the scribes Sadok and Eli of Capernaum. The executioners offer the condemned men 3 rags, so that they may tie them around their groins. The robbers take them, uttering the most horrible curses. Jesus, who strips himself slowly because of the pangs of the wounds, refuses it. He perhaps thinks that he can keep on the short drawers which he had on also during the flagellation, but when he is told to take them off as well, he stretches out his hand to beg for the rag of the executioners to conceal his nakedness. He is really the annihilated one, to the extent of having to ask a rag of criminals. But Mary has noticed everything, and she has removed the long, thin, white veil covering her head under her dark mantle, and on which she has already shed so many tears. She removes it without letting her mantle drop, and gives it to John, so that he may hand it to Longinus for her son. The centurion takes the veil without any objection, and when he sees that Jesus is about to strip himself completely, facing the side where there are no people, and thus turning towards the crowd, his back furrowed with bruises and blisters, and covering with some sores and dark crusts that are bleeding again, he gives him his mother's linen veil. Jesus recognizes it and wraps it around his pelvis several times, fastening it carefully so that it may not fall off. And on the linen veil, so far soaked only with tears, the first drops of blood begin to fall, because many of the wounds, just covered with blood clots, have reopened again as he stooped to take off his sandals and lay down his garments, and blood is streaming down again. Jesus now turns towards the crowd, and one can thus see that also his chest, legs, and arms have all been struck by the scourges. At the height of his liver there is a huge bruise, and under his left costal arch there are 7 clear stripes in relief, ending with 7 small cuts, bleeding inside a violaceous circle, a cruel blow of a scourge in such a sensitive region of the diaphragm. His knees, bruised by the repeated falls that began immediately after he was captured and ended on Calvary, are dark with hematomas, and the kneecaps are torn, particularly the right one, by a large bleeding wound. The crowd scoffs at him in a chorus. "Oh, handsome! The most handsome of the sons of men! The daughters of Jerusalem adore you!" And in the tone of a psalm they intone, "My beloved is fresh and ruddy, to be known among 10,000. His head is purest gold, his locks are palm fronds, as silky as the feathers of ravens. His eyes are like 2 doves bathing in streams of not of water, but of milk, in the milk of his orbit. His cheeks are beds of spices, his lips are purple lilies distilling precious myrrh. His hands are rounded like the work of a goldsmith, ending in rosy hyacinths. His trunk is ivory veined with sapphires. His legs are perfect columns of white marble on bases of gold. His majesty is like that of Lebanon. He is more majestic than the tall cedar. His conversation is drenched with sweetness, and he is altogether delightful." And they laugh and shout also, "The leper! The leper! So, have you fornicated with an idol? If God has struck you so, have you mumbled against the saints of Israel as Mary of Moses did? If you have been punished so, oh, the perfect one, are you the Son of God? Certainly not. You are the abortion of Satan. At least he, Mammon, is powerful. and strong. You are in rags. You are powerless and revolting. The robbers are tied to the crosses, and they are carried to their places, one to the right, one to the left, with regard to the place destined to Jesus. They howl, swear, curse, particularly when the crosses are carried to the holes, and they hurt, making the ropes cut into their wrists. Their oaths against God, the law, the Romans, the Judeans are hellish. It is Jesus' turn. He lies on the cross meekly. The two robbers were so rebellious that as the 4 executioners were not sufficient to hold them, some soldiers had to intervene to prevent them from kicking away the torturers who were tying their wrists to the cross. But no help is required for Jesus. He lies down and places his head where they tell him. He stretches out his arms and his legs as he is told. He only takes care to arrange his veil properly. Now his long, slender, white body stands out against the dark wood and the yellow ground. 2 executioners sit on his chest to hold him fast, and I think of the oppression and pain he must have felt under that weight. A third one takes his right arm, holding him with one hand on the first part of his forearm, and the other on the tips of his fingers. The fourth one, who already has in his hand a long, sharp-pointed quadrangular nail, ending with a round, flat head, as big as a large coin of bygone days, watches whether the hole already made in the wood corresponds to the radius ulnar joint of the wrist. It does. The executioner places the point of the nail on the wrist. He raises the hammer and gives the first stroke. Jesus, who had closed his eyes, utters a cry and has a contraction because of the sharp pain, and opens his eyes, flooded with tears. The pain he suffers must be dreadful. The nail penetrates, tearing muscles, veins, nerves, shattering bones. Mary replies to the cry of her tortured son with a groan that sounds almost like the moaning of a slaughtered lamb, and she bends as if she were crushed, holding her head in her hands. In order not to torture her, Jesus utters no more cries, but the strokes continue, methodical and hard, iron striking iron, and we must consider that a living limb receives them. The right hand is now nailed. They pass on to the left one. The hole in the wood does not correspond to the carpus, so they take a rope. They tie it to the left wrist, and they pull it until the joint is dislocated, tearing tendons and muscles, besides lacerating the skin already cut into by the ropes used to capture him. The other hand must suffer as well, because it is stretched as a consequence, and the hole in it widens round the nail. Now the beginning of the metacarpus, near the wrist, hardly arrives at the hole. They resign themselves, and they nail the hand where they can, that is, between the thumb and the other finger, just in the middle of the metacarpus. The nail penetrates more easily here, but with greater pain, because it cuts important nerves, so that the fingers remain motionless, whilst those of the right hand have contractions and tremors that denote their vitality. But Jesus no longer utters cries. He only moans in a deep, hoarse voice with his lips firmly closed, while tears of pain fall on the ground after falling on the wood. It is now the turn of his feet. At 2 meters and more from the foot of the cross there is a small wedge, hardly sufficient for 1 foot. Both feet are placed on it to see whether it is the right spot, and it is a little low, and the feet hardly reach it. They pull the poor martyr by his malleoli, so the coarse wood of the cross rubs on the wounds, moves the crown that tears his hair once again, and is on the point of falling. One of the executioners presses it down on his head again with a slap. Those who were sitting on Jesus' chest now get up to move to his knees, because Jesus, with an involuntary movement, withdraws his legs upon seeing the very long nail, which is twice as long and thick as those used for the hands, shine in the sunshine. They weigh on his flayed knees and press on his poor bruised shins, while the other 2 are performing the much more difficult operation of nailing 1 foot on top of the other, trying to combine the 2 joints of the tarsi. Although they try to keep the feet still, holding them by the malleoli and toes on the wedge, the foot underneath is shifted by the vibrations of the nail, and they have almost to unnail it, because the nail, which has pierced the tender parts and is already blunt, having pierced the right foot, is to be moved a little closer to the center, and they hammer and hammer and hammer. Only the dreadful noise of the hammer striking the head of the nail is heard, because all Calvary is nothing but eyes and ears, to perceive acts and noises and rejoice. The harsh noise of iron is accompanied by the low, plaintive lament of a dove, the hoarse groaning of Mary, who bends more and more at each stroke, as if the hammer wounded her, the martyr mother, and one understands that she is about to be crushed by such torture. Crucifixion is dreadful, equal to flagellation with regard to pain. It is more cruel to be seen, because one sees the nail disappear in the flesh, but in compensation it is shorter, whereas flagellation is enervating because of its duration. I think that the agony at Gethsemane, the flagellation, and the crucifixion are the most dreadful moments. They reveal all the torture of the Christ to me. His death relieves me because I say, it is all over, but they are not the end. They are the beginning of new sufferings. The cross is now dragged near the hole, and it jerks on the uneven ground, shaking the poor crucified. The cross is raised, and twice it slips out of the hands of those raising it. The first time it falls with a crash. The second time it falls on its right arm, causing terrible pain to Jesus, because the jerk he receives shakes his wounded limbs. But when they let the cross drop into its hole, and before being made fast with stones and earth, it sways in all directions, continuously, shifting the poor body, hanging from 3 nails. The suffering must be atrocious. All the weight of the body moves forward and downwards, and the holes become wider, particularly the ones on the left hand, and also the hole of the feet widens out, while the blood drips more copiously. And if that of the feet trickles along the toes onto the ground and along the wood of the cross, that of the hands runs along the forearms, as the wrists are higher up than the armpits because of the position, and it trickles down the sides from the armpits towards the waist. When the cross sways before being fastened, the crown moves because the head falls back, knocking against the wood, and drives the thick knot of thorns at the end of the prickly crown into the nape of the neck. Then it lies again on the forehead, scratching it mercilessly. At long last, the cross is made fast, and there is only the torture of being suspended. They raise the robbers, who, once they are placed in a vertical position, shout as if they were being flayed alive, because of the torture of the ropes that cut into their wrists and cause their hands to turn dark, with the veins swollen like ropes. Jesus is silent. The crowd, instead, is no longer silent. The people resume bawling in a hellish way. Now the top of Golgotha has its trophy, and its guard of honor. At the top there is the cross of Jesus. At the sides the other 2 crosses. Half a century of soldiers in fighting trim is placed round the summit. Inside this circle of armed soldiers there are the 10 dismounted soldiers who throw dice for the garments of the condemned men. Longinus is standing upright between the cross of Jesus and the one on the right, and he seems to be mounting guard of honor for the martyr king. The other half-century at rest is on the lower left path, and on the lower open space under the orders of Longinus and Longinus's adjutant, waiting to be employed in case of need. The indifference of the soldiers is almost total. Only an odd one now and again looks at the crucified men. Longinus, instead, watches everything with curiosity and interest. He makes comparisons and judges mentally. He compares the crucified men, and the Christ in particular, and the spectators. His piercing eye does not miss any detail, and to see better, he shades his eyes with his hand, because the sun must be annoying him. The sun is in fact strange. It is yellow-red like a fire. Then the fire seems to go out all of a sudden, because of a huge cloud of pitch that rises from behind the chain of the Judean mountains, and soars swiftly across the sky, disappearing behind other mountains. And when the sun comes out again, it is so strong that the eye endures it with difficulty. While looking, he sees Mary just under the slope, with her tormented face raised towards her son. He calls one of the soldiers who are playing dice and says to him, "If his mother wants to come up with the son who is escorting her, let her come. Escort her and help her." And Mary, with John, who is believed to be her son, climbs the steps cut into the tufaceous rock, I think, and passes beyond the cordon of soldiers, and goes to the foot of the cross, but a little aside, to be seen and see her Jesus. The crowd showers the most disgraceful abuses at her at once, associating her with her son in their curses. But with her trembling white lips she tries only to comfort him, with an anguished smile that wipes the tears which no willpower can refrain. The people, beginning with priests, scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, and the like, amuse themselves by going on a kind of roundabout, climbing the steep road, passing along the elevation at the end, and descending along the other road, or vice versa, and while they pass at the foot of the summit, on the second open space, they do not fail to offer their blasphemous words as a compliment to the dying victim. All the baseness, cruelty, hatred, and folly which men are capable of expressing with their tongues is amply testified by those infernal mouths. The fiercest are the members of the temple, with the assistance of the Pharisees. "Well, you, the Savior of mankind, why do you not save yourself? Has your king Beelzebub abandoned you? Has he disowned you? Shout 3 priests. And a group of Judeans shout, You, who not more than 5 days ago, with the help of the demon, made the Father say, Ha ha ha, that he would glorify you. How come you do not remind him to keep his promise? And 3 Pharisees add, Blasphemer, he said that he saved the others with the help of God, and he cannot save himself. Do you want us to believe you? Then work the miracle. Hey, are you no longer able? Your hands are now nailed, and you are naked. And some Sadducees and Herodians say to the soldiers, Watch his witchcraft. You have taken his garments. He has the infernal sign within himself. A crowd howls in chorus, Descend from the cross, and we will believe you. You who want to destroy the temple. Fool! Look at it over there, the glorious and holy temple of Israel. It is untouchable, O profaner, and you are dying. Other priests say, Blasphemous! You, the Son of God, come down from there, then. Strike us by lightning if you are God. We are not afraid of you, and we spit at you. Others who are passing by shake their heads, saying, He can but weep. Save yourself, if it is true that you are the chosen one. And the soldiers remark, So, save yourself. Burn to ashes the Sabura of the Sabura. Yes, you are the Sabura of the empire, you Judean rabble. Do so. Rome will put you on capital and will worship you as a god. The priests and their accomplices say, The arms of women were more pleasant than those of the cross, were they not? But look, and they utter a disgraceful word, are already there waiting to receive you. You have the whole of Jerusalem as your matchmaker, and they hiss like snakes. Others throw stones, shouting, Change these into bread, since you multiply loaves. Others, mimicking the hosannas of Palm Sunday, throw branches and shout, Curses on him who comes in the name of the demon. Cursed be his kingdom. Glory to Zion that cuts him off the living. A Pharisee stands in front of the cross. He raises his hand in an indecent gesture and says, I entrust you to the God of Sinai. Did you say? Now the God of Sinai is preparing you for the eternal fire. Why don't you call Jonah so that he may repay your kindness? Another one says, Don't ruin the cross with the strokes of your head. It is to be used for your followers. A whole legion of them will die on your cross. I swear it on Jehovah. And Lazarus will be the first one I'll put there. We shall see whether you free him from death now. Yes, let us go get Lazarus. Let us nail him on the other side of the cross. And parrot-like they speak slowly as Jesus is saying, Lazarus, my friend, come out. Unbind him and let him go. No, he used to say to Martha and Mary, his women, I am the resurrection and life. Ha ha ha! The resurrection cannot drive death back, and the life is dying. There is Mary with Martha over there. Let us ask them where Lazarus is, and let us look for him. And they come forward towards the women, asking arrogantly, Where is Lazarus? At his mansion? And while the other women, struck with terror, run behind the shepherds, Mary Magdalene comes forward, and finding in her grief the ancient boldness of her days of sin, she says, Go, you will already find the soldiers of Rome in the mansion with 500 armed men of my land, and they will castrate you like old billy goats, destined to feed the slaves of millstones. Impudent! Is that how you speak to priests? Sacrilegious! Filthy! Cursed! Turn round! On your backs I can see them. You have the tongues of infernal flames. Mary's assertion sounds so certain that the cowards, who are really struck with terror, turn round, but they have no flames on their shoulders. They have the sharp pointed lances at their backs. In fact, Longinus has given an order, and the 50 soldiers who are resting have come into action, and they prick the buttocks of the first Judeans they find. The latter run away shouting, and the soldiers stop to block the entrances to the 2 roads and protect the open space. The Judeans curse, but Rome is stronger. The Magdalene lowers her veil again. She had raised it to speak to the revilers, and goes back to her place. The other women join her. But the robber on the left-hand side continues to insult from his cross. He seems to have summarized all the curses of the other people, and he repeats them all, and ends by saying, Save yourself and save us if you want people to believe you. You, the Christ? You are mad. The world belongs to crafty people, and God does not exist. I do. That is true, and everything is permitted to me. God? Nonsense. Invented to keep us quiet. Long live our egos. Man's ego alone is king and God. The other robber, who is on the right-hand side, with Mary almost near his feet, and looks at her almost more than he looks at Jesus, and for some moments has been weeping, murmuring, My mother, says, Be silent. Do you not fear God even now that you suffer this pain? Why do you insult him who is good? And his torture is even greater than ours, and he has done nothing wrong. But the robber continues to curse. Jesus is silent, panting as a result of the effort he has to make because of his position, because of his fever and heart, and breathing conditions, the consequence of the flagellation he suffered in such a violent form, and also of the deep anguish that had made him sweat blood. He tries to find some relief by reducing the weight on his feet, pulling himself up with his arms and hanging from his hands. Perhaps he also does so to overcome the cramps that torture his feet, and it is revealed by the trembling of his muscles. But the same trembling is noticeable in the fibers of his arms, which are constrained in that position and must be frozen at their ends, because they are higher up and deprived of blood, which arrives at the wrists with difficulty and trickles from the holes of the nails, leaving the fingers without circulation. Those of the left hand in particular are already cadaveric and motionless, bent towards the palm. Also the toes of the feet show their pain, especially the big toes, move up and down and open out, probably because their nerves have not been injured so seriously. And the trunk reveals all its pain with its movement, which is fast but not deep, and tiresome without giving any relief. His ribs, wide and high as they are because the structure of his body is perfect, are now enlarged beyond measure as a consequence of the position taken by the body and of the pulmonary edema that has certainly developed inside. And yet they do not serve to relieve the effort in breathing, all the more that the abdomen with its movement helps the diaphragm, which is becoming more and more paralyzed. And the congestion and asphyxia increase every minute, as is shown by the cyanotic color that emphasizes the lips, which the fever has made bright red, and by the red-violet streaks which tinge the neck along the turgid jugular veins and widen out as far as the cheeks towards the ears and temples, while the nose is thin and bloodless, and the eyes are sunken in a circle which is livid where no blood has trickled from the crown. Under the left costal arch one can see the throbbing imparted by the point of the heart, an irregular but violent palpitation, and now and again, owing to an internal convulsion, the diaphragm has a deep pulsation which is revealed by a total stretching of the skin for what it can stretch on the poor, wounded, dying body. The face already has the aspect we see in the photographs of the Holy Shroud, with the nose diverged and swollen on one side, and the likeness is increased by the fact that the right eye is almost closed, owing to a swelling on this side. The mouth, instead, is open, with the wound on the upper lip by now turned into a crust. His thirst, caused by the loss of blood, by the fever, and by the sun, must be burning, so much so that he, with automatic movements, drinks the drops of his perspiration and his tears, as well as those of blood that run down from his forehead to his mustache, and he wets his tongue with them. The crown of thorns prevents him from leaning against the trunk of the cross to help the suspension of on his arms and lighten the weight on his feet. His kidneys and all his spine are curved outwards, detached from the cross from his pelvis upwards, owing to the force of inertia that makes a body suspended like his hang forward. The Judeans, driven beyond the open space, do not stop insulting, and the unrepentant robber echoes their insults. The other one, who now looks at the mother with deeper and deeper compassion, and weeps, answers him back sharply when he hears that she is also included in the insult. "Be silent! Remember that you were born of a woman, and consider that our mothers have wept because of their sons, and they were tears of shame, because we are criminals. Our mothers are dead. I would like to ask mine to forgive me, but shall I be able? She was a holy woman. I killed her with the sorrow I gave her. I am a sinner. Who will forgive me? Mother, in the name of your dying son, pray for me." The mother, for a moment, raises her tortured face and looks at him, the poor wretch who, through the remembrance of his mother and the contemplation of the mother, moves towards repentance, and she seems to caress him with her kind, gentle eyes. Disma weeps louder, which raises even more the mockery of the crowd and of his companions. The former shout, "Very well, take her as your mother, so she will have 2 criminal sons." The latter aggravates the situation, saying, "She loves you because you are a smaller copy of her darling." Jesus speaks for the first time. "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing." This prayer overcomes all fear in Disma. He dares to look at the Christ and says, "Lord, remember me when you are in your kingdom. It is just that I should suffer, but give me mercy and peace hereafter. I heard you speak once, and I foolishly rejected your words. I now repent, and I repent of my sins before you, the Son of the Most High. I believe that you come from God. I believe in your power. I believe in your mercy. Christ, forgive me in the name of your mother and of your most holy Father." Jesus turns round and looks at him with deep compassion, and he smiles a still beautiful smile with his poor, tortured lips. He says, "I tell you, Today you will be with me in paradise." The repentant robber calms down, and as he no longer remembers the prayers he learned when a child, he repeats as an ejaculation, "Jesus Nazarene, King of the Jews, have mercy on me. Jesus Nazarene, King of the Jews, I hope in you. Jesus Nazarene, King of the Jews, I believe in your divinity." The other robber continues cursing. The sky becomes duller and duller. Now the clouds hardly ever open to let the sun shine. On the contrary, they cluster on top of one another in leaden, white, greenish strati. They disentangle according to the caprices of a cold wind, which at times blows in the sky, then descends to the ground, and then drops again, and then it drops the air. And when it drops, the air is almost more sinister, sultry, and dull than when it hisses, blowing, biting, and fast. The light, previously exceedingly bright, is becoming greenish, and faces look strange. The profiles of the soldiers under their helmets and in their armor, which were previously shining and have now become rather tarnished in the green light and under an ashen gray sky, are so hard that they seem to be chiseled. The Judeans, the complexion, hair, and beards of whom are mostly brown, seem drowned people, so wan are their faces. The women look like statues of bluish snow because of their deadly paleness, which is accentuated by the light. Jesus seems to be turning ominously livid because of a beginning of putrefaction, as if he were already dead. His head begins to hang over his chest. His strength fails him rapidly. He shivers, although he is burning with fever, and in his weakness he whispers the name that so far he has only uttered in the bottom of his heart. "Mother, mother," he murmurs it in a low voice, like a sigh, as if he were already lightly delirious, and thus prevented from holding back what his will would not like to reveal. And each time Mary makes an unrestrainable gesture of stretching her arms, as if she wished to succor him, and the cruel people laugh at such pangs of him who is dying, and of her who suffers agonies. Priests and scribes climb up again as far as the shepherds, who, however, are on the lower open space, and as the soldiers want to drive them back, they react, saying, "Are these Galileans staying here? We want to stay here as well, as we have to ascertain that justice is done to the very end, and from afar in this light we cannot see." In fact, many begin to be upset by the light that is enveloping the world, and some people are afraid. Also the soldiers point to the sky, to a kind of cone that seems of slate, so dark it is, and that rises like a pine tree from behind the top of a mountain. It looks like a water spout. It rises and seems to produce darker and darker clouds, as if it were a volcano belching smoke and lava. It is in this frightening twilight that Jesus gives John to Mary, and Mary to John. He lowers his head because the mother has gone closer to the cross to see him better, and he says, "Woman, this is your son. Son, this is your mother." Mary looks even more upset after this word, which is the will of Jesus, who has nothing to give his mother but a man. He, out of love for man, deprives her of the man-God born of her. But the poor mother tries to weep only silently, because it is impossible for her not to weep. Tears stream down her cheeks, notwithstanding all the efforts to refrain them, even if on her lips there is a heartbroken smile to comfort him. Jesus' suffering increases more and more, and the light fades more and more. It is in this sea-bottom light that Nicodemus and Joseph appear from behind some Judeans, and they say, "Step aside." "You are not allowed. What do you want?" ask the soldiers. "To pass. We are friends of the Christ." The chief priests turn round. "Who dare profess himself friend of the rebel?" ask the priests indignantly. And Joseph replies resolutely, "I, Joseph of Arimathea, the elder and noble member of the Supreme Council, and Nicodemus, the head of the Judeans, is with me. Those who side with the rebel are rebels, and those who take side with murderers are murderers. Eleazar of Annas, I have lived as a just man, and now I am old and close to death, and I do not want to become unjust while heaven is already descending upon me, and the eternal judge with it. And you, Nicodemus, I am surprised. So am I, and of one thing only, that Israel is so corrupt that you cannot even recognize God any more. You disgust me. Move aside then, and let me pass. That is all I want. To become even more contaminated? If I have not become contaminated being with you, nothing else will ever contaminate me. Soldier, here is the purse and my pass." And he gives the decurion, who is closest to him, a purse and a waxed board. The decurion examines them and says to the soldiers, "Let the two men pass." And Joseph and Nicodemus approach the shepherds. I do not even know whether Jesus can see them in the thick fog that is getting thicker and thicker, and with his eyes that are already veiled by the agony, but they see him, and they weep without any respect for public opinion, although the priests now abuse them. The sufferings are worse and worse. The body begins to suffer from the arching typical of tetanus, and the clamor of the crowd exasperates it. The death of fibers and nerves extends from the tortured limbs to the trunk, making breathing more and more difficult. Diaphragmatic contraction, weak and heart beating, weak and heart beating irregular. The face of Christ passes in turns from very deep red blushes to the greenish paleness of a person bleeding to death. His lips move with greater difficulty because the overstrained nerves of the neck and of the head itself, that for dozens of times have acted as a lever for the whole body, pushing on the crossbar, spread the cramp also to the jaws. His throat, swollen by the obstructed carotid arteries, must be painful, and must spread its edema to the tongue, which looks swollen and slow in its movements. His back, even in the moments when the tetanizing contraction do not bend it in a complete arch from the nape of his neck to his hips, leaning as extreme points against the stake of the cross, bends more and more forward, because the limbs are continuously weighed down by the burden of the dead flesh. The people cannot see this situation very clearly, because the light now is like dark ashes, and only those who are at the foot of the cross can see well. At a certain moment, Jesus collapses forwards and downwards, as if he were already dead. He no longer pants. His head hangs inertly forward. His body, from his hips upward, is completely detached from the cross, forming an angle with its bar. Mary utters a cry, "He is dead!" a tragic cry that spreads in the dark air, and Jesus seems really dead. Another cry of a woman replies to her, and I see a bustle in the group of the women. Then some 10 people go away holding something, but I cannot see who goes away so. The foggy light is too faint. It looks as we are immersed in a cloud of very dense volcanic ash. "It is not possible," shout some of the priests and of the Judeans. "It is a simulation to make us go away. Soldier, prick him with your lance. It is good medicine to give his voice back to him." And as the soldiers do not do so, a volley of stones and clods of earth fly towards the cross, hitting the martyr and falling back on the armor of the Romans. The medicine, as the Judeans say ironically, works the wonder. Some of the stones have certainly hit the target, perhaps the wound of a hand or the head itself, because they were aiming high. Jesus moans pitifully and recovers his senses. His thorax begins to breathe again with difficulty, and his head moves from left to right, seeking where it may rest in order to suffer less, but finding nothing but greater pain. With great difficulty, pressing once again on his tortured feet, finding strength in his will, and only in it, Jesus stiffens on the cross. He stands upright as if he were a healthy man, with all his strength. He raises his face, looking with wide open eyes at the world stretched at his feet, at the faraway town which one can see just indistinctly as a vague whiteness in the mist, and at the dark sky where every trace of blue and of light has disappeared, and to this closed, compact, low sky resembling a huge slab of dark slate, he shouts in a loud voice, overcoming with his willpower and with the need of his soul the obstacle of his swollen tongue and his edematous throat, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." I hear him say so. He must feel that he is dying, and in absolute abandonment by heaven, if he confesses his Father's abandonment with such an exclamation. People laugh and deride him. They insult him, saying, "God has nothing to do with you. Demons are cursed by God." Other people shout, "Let us see whether Elijah, whom he is calling, will come to save him." And others say, "Give him some vinegar that he may gargle his throat. It helps one's voice. Elijah or God, as it is certain what this madman wants, are far away. A loud voice is required to make oneself heard, and they laugh like hyenas or like demons." But no soldier gives him vinegar, and no one comes from heaven to give comfort. It is the solitary, total, cruel, also supernaturally cruel agony of the great victim. The avalanches of desolate grief which had already oppressed him at Gethsemane come back again. The waves of the sins of all the world come back to strike the shipwrecked innocent, to submerge him in their bitterness. And above all, what comes back is the sensation, more crucifying than the cross itself, more despairing than any torture, that God has abandoned him, and that his prayer does not rise to him. And it is the final torture. the one that accelerates death, because it squeezes the last drops of blood out of the pores, because it crushes the remaining fibers of the heart, because it ends with the first knowledge of his abandonment has begun, death. Because of that, as first cause, my Jesus died, O God, who have struck him for us. Because after your abandonment, through your abandonment, what does a person become? Either insane or dead. Jesus could not become insane because his intelligence was divine, and since intelligence is spiritual, it triumphed over the total trauma of him whom God had struck, so he became a dead man. The dead man, the most holy dead man, the most innocent dead man, he who was the life, was dead, killed by your abandonment and by our sins. Darkness becomes deeper. Jerusalem disappears completely. The very slopes of Calvary seem to vanish. Only the top is visible, as if darkness held it high up to receive the only and last surviving light, laying it as an offering, with its divine trophy, on a pool of liquid onyx, so that it may be seen by love and by hatred.